let's get an idea of what's going to be needed as far as humanitarian assistance in a conflict situation. We can speak to our own Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman of the Gift of the Givers. Dr. Sooliman, good to have you on the program as always. So what becomes the first port of call for an organization that wants to assist at a humanitarian level, given that this is an active situation?
Good evening, Kemikele. Humanitarian situations don't respond in the active situation immediately. That is what happens in a war situation is normally the government, civil society all get together and they have their own plan of action. Because you don't intervene immediately in the beginning stages. Also, it depends, because it always depends how long this war is going to take. Is this invasion going to be for 5 days, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, or 5 years? We don't know. Obviously, given the size of the Ukraine and given the size of Russia, this invasion cannot last too long. In the initial stages, you have different scenarios. One is where the society gets together, what government, and you have to look at internal displacement and external displacement. In internal displacement, you have organized camps where people go into shelters, in this case, in the station or anywhere else. And at initial stages also, the people themselves take care of themselves. They have money, they have food, they have items, and that sustains them for a period of time. When that runs out, then additional support has to come in from government or external sources. At the same time, you have movement of people from the country to the outside. And in this case, of course, it's going to be Poland, Romania, Slovenia, Moldova, where the governments of those countries then set up camps or whatever and take care of those people. At some point, people are going to run out of funds, inside the country and even the governments outside the country. And that's when major international organizations start, or even local organizations start coming in to assist. The other big challenge is, at that point, when some move to be internally displaced and others move outside the country, then you have quite often elderly people or people who are ill, cannot be moved, left alone in houses. And that becomes a challenge. How do you respond on an individual basis to people left alone in their homes? Because for some point they can't move, they're too ill, and there's nobody to take care of them because the younger generation has left. That becomes a very complicated issue. And then the other big challenge is if water is cut off, electricity is cut off, you need to provide water, sanitation becomes a problem, disease becomes a problem, and of course the major problem is if hospitals are hit. If hospitals are hit, clinics are hit, buildings are hit, you now have an increased demand on the medical resources, where you require medical support in terms of trauma, primary medicine as well as trauma medicine, and require additional personnel. And as the war prolongs and the situation becomes more complicated, all these factors become exacerbated. And one last point that we can discuss is that initially, as I mentioned, people try to do everything possible to assist each other. There may still be movement of goods within the country from other parts of the country to the main cities that are affected. But eventually when that's stopped, when the borders are closed, when goods become difficult, then you see the worst in humanity. You see those who start exploiting prices, some giving things at cost, some giving goods for free, but others putting huge markups on items which become a huge need, and that becomes a real challenge for people caught up in the country itself.
And the president of Ukraine at the beginning of this invasion, Volodymyr Zelensky, had in fact said what they're going to need among the key things would be blood stocks, because a lot of people will be injured. How easy is it to get blood donations, given that if everyone is sort of scattered and afraid, they may not be willing to come to a hospital unless they desperately need to be there?
That's easy. That depends on the dedication and the commitment of the citizens themselves, how patriotic they are. You don't have to bring them to the hospital. You can go to them. It's not complicated. And in most countries, I've seen that thousands of them turn up to give blood donation. That's not a difficult issue. It all depends on the commitment and the patriotism of those individuals to themselves and to their country. And in most cases, that is never an issue.
And in terms of who gets help first, do we start with the elderly, the children, and the women always?
No. It's based on the practicality of the situation. You can't separate them because elderly, the women and children may all be together. So if you are working in a situation like the shelter, they're all there together. So it's not, a priority. You just help whoever is there. You have to be realistic. You're not going to be able to help everybody. That's a war situation. And you can get bombed in the process. So it's a story about the low-hanging fruit. Get to people where you can, as fast as you can, as easy as you can. So the easiest one probably will be the ones outside the country, where they're not at risk, But the risk becomes when the camps become overpopulated, when there's not enough space, and then there's friction within the camps, when there's not enough supply, from the host government. That becomes a major problem. Depending how congested it is, disease becomes a problem. And of course, in our situation now, the new challenge is COVID can spread in a situation like that. It's a whole new challenge in a war zone. But there's no selection. You try to help everybody at the same time. And what that comes, the babies, baby food becomes a big problem. Baby milk becomes a big problem. And there's a shortage of that. The injured require assistance to save life. Your priority is to save life. But you can't say, okay, women first, old people first, next, children next. It doesn't work that way.
Who then guarantees the safety of aid workers, given that, yes, you said you don't go into active war situations to deliver aid, but you and I know that often the front line can move quite quickly?
When I say that, I mean it. We do go into active war situations, but not in the initial phase. We've been in many wars, but it's not something you do immediately. It's something that happens later when you see all these things that I mentioned at the beginning start collapsing. When the government can't support each other, support its people, the people can't support its people, the own agencies in the country can't support it, outside the countries can't support. When that happens, then you have to go in. To answer your question, there is no guarantee. Nobody follows the rule of law. Nobody follows the Geneva Convention. You're an aid worker, you're a target. You are bombed in the process too. It's a risk you've got to take. Your team's got to know that. You have to prepare in advance your teams to say there's a risk that you can get killed, you can get bombed, you can get maimed, you can lose a lung. It can't happen. There is no respect in war situations anymore. People directly target hospitals. They target ambulances. They target clinics. They target water stations, electric supplies, sewage plants. They cause maximum damage as far as possible as part of a war methodology. And aid workers are part of that process to be targeted, whether you're local or international.